Okay, so students, I promised you that you were going to meet one of our students, one of the most successful students of Point Loma in terms of the media comm major. And Jason Carter is here to tell about his journey, about his projects he's worked on, and also he's going to bring in the faith dimension, and it should be a good session. So, Jason,
Yeah, hey,
tell us a
thanks
little bit
for
about yourself. Yeah.
thanks, thanks for that intro. I certainly did not deserve that kind of praise, but I appreciate it. It's really kind. Um, yeah, I guess maybe what I thought we could do to start is I'll just kind of go through a little bit of kind of my story, how kind of my faith has played a role in that, and just give you a little bit about I have an idea of kind of what I've gone through in my life and professional career. And then, maybe after that, we could chat a little bit about what it's kind of meant to work in the film industry and take my communications degree further beyond that and stuff like that. So I guess maybe to start it off, I'll take you all the way back to, I'm going to really date myself here, but all the way back to the year 1995. There's a movie that came out. I was, just starting high school at the time, and this movie came out called Toy Story, and really the start of part of my identity as a working professional started with that movie. I walked into Toy Story. I've always grew up loving Disney movies, but I walked into Toy Story, and that movie it hit my heart in a way that I've never experienced in a film before. It was something that I knew as that movie, as the end credits rolled, I knew I had to be a part of making computer generated stories. And I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that it was honestly a passion that was so prevalent and so huge that it was only something that could have come from someone beyond me, because I've had a lot of interest in my life, but honestly that was kind of a God-given passion because it was so powerful. And so I began to kind of study a little bit on my own, kind of computer generated world, and there was very little at the time that was publicly and presently available, not a ton on the internet to kind of research. So I really didn't have a ton to go on, so I studied as best I could by listening to like DVD special features as A Bug's Life came out, and then there were a couple of other CG movies that started to come out, and it was starting the ball rolling. And what I ultimately ended up with was saying, okay, what do I know about this world? I know that there's computers are involved, the technology part is involved, and then there's also the art component as well. And so I kind of had this crossroads of, well, if I'm going to get involved, how exactly should I get involved? And really, ultimately, it came down to my skill set, while varied at the time, was geared a little bit more towards science, math, and technology. And so I kind of ended up going the computer route. And so what ended up happening was I had a bunch of colleges that had great computer programs, computer science programs, and kind of eventually Point Loma sort of just started to surface up to the top. I looked at both public and private schools. For me, the idea of having faith as a regular component of my education was really, really important, to learn from teachers that shared that faith and that belief, but also to learn from students and peers around me that also shared that faith as well. I figured if I'm going to go and learn this crazy world of uh, computer animation, I wanted to do it with other Christians who kind of thought a little bit like me and shared some values as well that I shared. So I ended up going to choosing Point Loma because it was a really great combination of a low student to teacher ratio, had a really strong computer science program, and faith was a major component of the education. And so I chose Point Loma, started as a computer science major. And I'll fast forward a little bit in the story here and just tell you that it did not go well for me. It was not my shining victory moment of my education. Basically, I couldn't quite keep up in classes while I had that mindset for the technology, the idea of sitting at a computer all day, every day, not really interacting with people on an artistic level, just starting to really not fit for me. And so a little bit of a struggle with classes, and then a little bit of realization that it was not quite down the path towards the creation of the story component that I was so drawn to. I ended up kind of switching majors in the middle of my undergrad at Point Loma. And so I had the privilege of working with Dr. Hewitt. His first year at Point Loma. I remember that very distinctly. And so I switched over to the media communications major with a concentration in production, and had this interesting problem. At the time, Point Loma had the greatest component of storytelling that Point Loma had was either through the journalism angle or the creative kind of English writing world, which is not me, or it had kind of TV news and radio broadcast focus. And while there is definitely an amazing component of storytelling within that, it wasn't quite the one that tickled my heart, right? The idea of fictional narratives that really kind of draw to mass audiences that aren't necessarily culturally topical. Those things really resonated with me. And so the idea of trying to find storytelling and find out how to learn film and filmmaking and script writing and storytelling and all that, Point Loma at the time didn't really have that kind of an offering. And so very, very luckily, I would say that Dr. Hewitt and I found each other. I would say that's the story that I tell people is I found a professor who was also recognizing that there was a gap in the education that Point Loma was offering in the communications world, particularly as it comes to narrative storytelling. And I think, Dr. Hewitt, if I may be so bold as to suggest, I think you found a guinea pig in me that was willing to kind of try some things and fail miserably along the way. And I'll skip a couple parts, but eventually creating a much more strong curriculum around what it means to teach and to learn narrative storytelling and story creation at Point Loma. And so, a lot of different trials and failures on my part of some things that we tried and talked through, but ultimately what we decided was we were going to figure out how. I had a couple of peers that I was working with in the media communications world that had a similar passion for filmmaking. And we decided that we were going to go off to the big LA school. We were going to go to the school called LAFSC, which is kind of a Christian film school. We were going to go off and do that. And that's where God wanted us to go. I had prayed a ton about it and really felt like this is where I was kind of called to be. And we were going to go learn a ton and then kind of come back with our filmmaking knowledge from LA, because the program is actually in LA working on live productions and stuff like that in Hollywood. And basically I applied, and a couple of the people that were in my peer group got in, and I did not. For whatever reason, it was not in the cards for me to do that. God had a very, very different plan for me. And I won't lie, that was a big moment of failure, of rejection. There was a lot of lack of self-confidence that came from that. I had my identity as a Christian, as a passionate person, was wrapped up in this idea of I'm going to go work in the movie industry. I'm going to tell animated movies and stories. And I felt like a door had shut. And as you know, whenever God shuts a door, he opens another one. And I didn't know it at the time, but the door that God was opening was far greater and had far more long-reaching success than I could have ever imagined. So as I drug myself out of self-pity at Point Loma, I kind of had this moment of realization of, okay, well, while some of my closest friends are off, working on actual film productions, I'm going to get my own education. So again, I came, groveling back to Dr. Hewitt and said, I need some practical experience here. I've got an idea. I think we kind of came to it together. And I said, I think I want to create a short film here at Point Loma. A short film that challenges what we know about what's been done so far at Point Loma, but also challenges myself and what I know, and challenges myself as an artist and a creator. And we came up with this super crazy idea. I mean, crazy is such an understatement for what we were trying to embark on. We came up with this idea that we were going to do a long form short film about pirates. So a period piece having to do with big costumes, lots of cast, having to do with water, with a 30-minute script, when none of us, I didn't have a ton of screenwriting experience. And we're doing all of this. I had this vision of doing all of this at a school that frankly didn't have a film department or an infrastructure to be able to support this. And so I spent some time in prayer. I know Dr. Hewitt did as well. And we kind of agreed to say, let's give it a shot. Let's try it. And so we spent, I call it kind of my senior thesis. It was kind of the junior senior year, but I spent this huge chunk of time writing a screenplay, writing a story, turning that into a screenplay, and then developing this idea of this kind of fanciful Disney-inspired Pirates of the Caribbean type feel movie called The Isle Nevis. And The Isle Nevis was, I like to tell people that, going back in the story, it was this tremendous success from a scope and curriculum standpoint. But man, is that movie terrible. When you go back and you look at the work that you've done, it never ever meets the expectations that you have for it. You're never satisfied. And I think that is the plight of the true plight of an artist, I think.
The last group that I showed it in the script writing class, they applauded for like 15 seconds. Yeah, that's a long time.
They probably thought that you were showing them a comedy or a farce of some sort. So no, it was a big undertaking. At one point, we had about 30 extras. You know, a lot of Point Loma staff and students that agreed to be in a pirate movie. We worked to hire some actors, some local talent. We had big lights and equipment that was rented and donated. We got the Panasonic Corporation to actually donate camera equipment to the school itself. They bought into kind of the vision of the curriculum that we were trying to do and get more storytelling involved, narrative storytelling involved in Point Loma. And so they donated cameras to us. And long story short, we ended up shooting The Isle Nevis, which was a 30-minute long pirate movie across all kinds of different parts of San Diego. We got to shoot on a couple of pretty prominent tall ships, including the Star of India and the Californian down in the San Diego harbor, as well as at one point we got to do some aerial photography of the Lady Washington, which is the ship that was also the interceptor in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, the Pirates of the Caribbean: Curse of the Black Pearl. And so there was a lot of God at work through me learning and showing different dailies footage to Dr. Hewitt and us kind of just building this thing together. And after a semester or longer, I think it was actually a course of a year from start to finish, we ended up with a movie that frankly we were very, very proud of. It was not, again, the greatest creative masterpiece in the world, but it was something that we did together as a group. My peer group had come back from Los Angeles and kind of came on board and helped me bring this movie to life. And at this point, I had made a live action pirate movie, and my education was satisfying because I did some things that I wanted to learn how to do, and it was done with the support of Point Loma. But that nagging feeling was in the back of my head that while this is live action and this is awesome, I have no idea how to turn this into a career, let alone a career in the animation world. And so I was lucky enough to kind of finish out a few computer science classes, just enough to kind of classify in that minorish category. And so we took the Isle Nevis to a couple of film festivals, and through the film festival circuit, there was one in particular where it went pretty well for us. There was basically kind of this David and Goliath type story of a prominent producer in Hollywood who had some, Hollywood talent, including the actor who had played Rufio in Hook. They had a short film that they had made and that we were competing against, and we were this ragtag group of nobodies from San Diego, school nobody had really heard of. And long story short, we ended up more or less winning and kind of beating the Goliath of the story in the film festival. And I'll never forget, because afterwards, the producer, this prominent Hollywood producer, her name is Noelle Wolfman, she came up to me and she said, "Hey, what are you doing with this movie? What are you doing with your career?" And I had no idea how to respond to it, because at the time I felt like, this thing had done well and I had learned a ton, but I don't know, how do you make a career in Hollywood, let alone when Hollywood had rejected you? And that was my mentality, is because I didn't make it into that film school, Hollywood had rejected me. And so she looked at me and she smiled, and she could tell I didn't really have a great answer for it. And she handed me her business card. And I never forget this because I looked at her business card and it was the most speechless I've ever been in my life because it said she was a production manager at DreamWorks Animation. It was one of very few places that at the time was doing CG storytelling at a feature quality level. And making a really kind of long story short here, I wasn't quite done with college at this point, but I knew that I needed to go and talk to her. And so I kind of kept a conversation going. We hit it off very, very well. And as I graduated, I didn't quite have a job lined up, but as I graduated, I was doing the Best Buy Geek Squad thing for part-time work. And then I told myself I had a choice. I could go to grad school, and through grad school, I could study film at like a USC or a prominent NYU, a prominent film school somewhere in the nation, or I could kind of continue my ragtag guerrilla learning style and try and teach myself based on the specifics of what I wanted to learn. And ultimately, I prayed about that a lot and really felt that God was telling me to not do the grad school thing. And so while I was working part-time at Best Buy, I spent every spare minute that I had learning. And at this point, availability of information had come a long way. Learning what it meant to make computer-generated movies. I may have illegally acquired some software to try out on my own that they use in the film industry. Don't quote me on that. And I also put in every computer animated movie. I watched every one of them twice. I'll never forget this. During a summer, I put every one that I could find and I watched it twice. Once to watch the movie and then once to watch it again with the director's commentary on. Because what I did was I wanted to learn, I wanted to hear what kind of problems they had come up against and what their solutions were. I wanted to know the world that they were in. I became obsessed with the idea of learning by listening to others. And through this, the conversation with DreamWorks Animation started to pick up a little bit, and I was able to reference some very specific things. I'll never forget it. Some very specific language that I'd picked up from the director's commentary of The Bug's Life, and apply that in an interview, kind of an informal interview with this woman from DreamWorks. And she told me, she's like, so very clearly you have a lot of passion and not a lot of experience. And I said, I think that sums me up very, very well. And she said, but at the same time, you did pretty well with your short film. So I think you've got a shot here and I'd like to bring you on. And I found myself faced with a job offer to join DreamWorks Animation. And I'll tell you, the moment that
What year was that?
So that was 2004.
And you graduated in 4, didn't you?
I did. I graduated in early June, late May, something like that, and I started in September. So there was a summer of intense learning, and then a job offer that kind of popped up there. So basically right out of undergrad, and I'll never forget it. When the email came, she told me she's like, hey, in our interview, she's like, well, we're interviewing a couple other people, but she's like, your passion is clearly there. When the email came that said, congratulations from DreamWorks Animation, and I saw that logo, I was shocked. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I felt like God had put this passion on my heart, and I had no knowledge or idea of how to go do that thing. And yet I knew that God had put pieces in place for me to get there. A journey that I would have never naturally chosen for myself, learnings in different ways that I could have never possibly understood would have gone anywhere, and yet they did. And so I'll never forget it, because the moment that I got that email, I'd be lying if I said I didn't tear up just a little bit. And then also I immediately prayed. And I immediately just said, God, this is you. Thank you for this. Thank you for putting this on my heart, and thank you for opening up the doors to make this possible. And I, at that point, began the first stage of my professional career. So I'll go over very, very quickly this part with you, but I was at DreamWorks Animation for 7 years. Through that time, I started as a production assistant. There's two different tracks in kind of the animation world. There's the kind of producer world, the PA, the let's call it non-creative. I believe everybody's creative, but the little bit more of the logistical problem solvers, and then the creative problem solvers. And so I started on the logistical problem solver side of the house. I worked as a PA on a TV show. It wasn't a film. It was a TV show called Father of the Pride, which was oh so terrible. It was awful. It was about Siegfried and Roy from Las Vegas. It was about their herd of lions, and not tigers, but lions. And it was on primetime NBC. The first season was out and had aired that fall when I got hired at DreamWorks. And I got brought on to manage the story department, the storyboarding department for season 2. And so I thought to myself, hey, I'm here. This is amazing. I've made it. I'm learning a ton, and I'm giving it every single ounce of my passion that I can. About 3 months into the job, the first season of the show was doing so terribly in the ratings that they had to sit everybody down and say, hey, yeah, all you people who joined for season 2, that's not going to happen. So good luck. And I was faced with my very first real moment of, wait, do I now not have a job? And again, coming to God and saying, wait, you open these doors. What is happening here? What have you done? What are you doing? And long story short, the DreamWorks is an amazing company, and they tried to place as many people that they had hired for season 2 of Father of the Pride as they could into other productions. And I was very fortunate to be one of those people to join the animation department in a movie called Flushed Away. Flushed Away was a cooperative production between Aardman Animation in Bristol, who did all the Wallace and Gromit and Shaun the Sheep kind of claymation stuff. They were in a multi-picture deal with DreamWorks Animation to produce 3 movies, the first of which was Chicken Run, and then I believe Flushed Away was the second one, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And so I joined Flushed Away, again in the logistical side as a kind of PA coordinator in the animation department. And then did that for a while. And as that was happening, there was another movie that was kind of starting up in production. I got my first official movie credit on Flushed Away. But while we were making that, there's another movie that popped up called Kung Fu Panda, which you can probably see my Kung Fu Panda statue back over there. I remember distinctly during the making of Flushed Away, thinking, hey, the production, the logistical side of things I'm learning so much, but it's not where my passion is. And so while I'm in the general space of where my passion is, I'm not doing the thing I'm passionate about, which is creative problem solving and storytelling. And so I found myself, and I distinctly remember thinking, wait, so is it okay? You've achieved your goal of getting in at an animation studio. Is it actually okay for your dream to have changed? For your dream to have been more focused? And I remember thinking that. And I started to have a conversation with my boss at the time, amazing woman, who basically said, yeah, hey, follow your heart. You'll have a bright career in the animation industry no matter what you want to do, but follow your heart. And so I started to have a conversation with another Christian man that I found that was in a very obscure department of DreamWorks, and he was on Kung Fu Panda. And he said, hey, what are you specifically interested in? We talked a little bit, and I then made the transition over to Kung Fu Panda as Flushed Away was released. And on the course of Kung Fu Panda is where I started and I changed my career direction from the production side, the logistical side, over to the kind of creative side. And specifically, I joined Kung Fu Panda, started on the production, but in the middle of it, changed over to be what's called a final layout artist. Now, in the CG world, different studios have different pipelines and different ways of working and workflows to make their movies. At DreamWorks, Final Layout is the group that is responsible for setting up all of the computer scenes for the animators. And then after the animators are done animating the characters, we get the scene back where it is, oh, sorry, there's a dog barking in the background.
That's okay. That's okay.
And so we after the animators were done animating the characters, they give it back to the final layout artists who would do the final camera animation, the final little breath of life, subtle movements, big sweeping Michael Bay camera movements to tiny little subtle like noise that you add to it just to give it a little bit of handheld feel. And I joined that department. And I was in that department for many, many years. I worked with some amazing people. I worked in that department on Kung Fu Panda, B Movie, Monsters versus Aliens. Also worked in that department on How to Train Your Dragon briefly. I'm not credited in that one because I only did a few shots, but yeah, did a number of movies doing that. And it was actually during Monsters versus Aliens. This is around now 2007, mid 2007, where this amazing thing had happened in the film industry. It was called Netflix. So Netflix had come around and started as this DVD mail-in, subscription service. And then they released in 2007 this idea of streaming. And streaming content coming to the home, as you know, has fundamentally now changed the way that the world works. So in 2007, about mid-2007, what was happening is all the studios in Hollywood were really struggling financially, and they were seeing their profit margins shrink because the box office, while that remained more or less steady, the home video market was being completely table flipped upside down. And so the extra money that studios were seeing coming in from selling DVDs was evaporating before their eyes. So my department was sitting in front of Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was the CEO of DreamWorks at the time. And I'll never forget this. The way I tell people the story is he said, "Hey, we're losing money because of home video is going away. We see this as a trend and we want to get out in front of it." And so to do that, we figured out a way to get some profit back by resurrecting a technology that had died in the 1950s and had a brief resurgence in the 1980s. And the story I tell people is I was the last person in the audience still listening to him talk when he uttered the words, "So we're going to make stereoscopic 3D movies." I didn't really know what that meant, but he pointed to me and he said, you can figure out what this means and how to do this. The truth of the matter is there was some interest involved in myself as well. And if you ask questions, people are going to assume you're interested. So I asked some questions. They assumed I was interested. And I found myself with a couple of other people at DreamWorks, about 4 of us, trying to figure out what it meant to take a rendered movie where you render every scene onto a flat image to now where you have to produce 2 of them, one for the left eye and one for the right eye, using technology that was not built to be able to do anything more than render a single flat image. And I found myself facing incubation, which was doing a new piece of technology in a technological pipeline that hadn't been done before. And so when I started on Monsters versus Aliens is when we started to do 3D, the first kind of 3D movie coming from DreamWorks. At the time, there were very, very few. I was actually one of 12 people in the world who was doing this, being paid to do this professionally. We started with, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like $18 million of production cost on top of a normal 90 million, $100 million budget just to make a 3D movie. And we were only recouping about 3% above what it normally would. So it was really honestly a catastrophic failure from a business standpoint. And I found myself having to solve 2 problems in this world. And by the way, this is kind of in my career where I started to kind of manage a few people and manage a creative area. At all the big studios, the big animation studios, the most important thing is the story. That is the most important thing. Every single element of the film complements and does not distract from the story. From the choice of lighting to the subtlety in the animation to the textures on the clothes, everything is tweaked to complement the story. And so I took my group of kind of creative technical people and looked at the problem around solving 3D technically in the pipeline, but also solving it creatively. And this is where I felt like for the first time, I was in the world, in the zone of doing exactly what I wanted to be doing, which is solving creative problems for stories, for computer-generated stories. And the process that we went through to solve it creatively was the same as any other department. You look at the story, you look at the emotional high points and the emotional low points, and you take the creative decisions that you can make with 3D. How deep is a scene? how close is it to, or far away is it to the audience? How distorted is the scene? Those are elements that you can play with in the 3D world. And so we took those and tweaked them and came up with a visual language. And together I worked with the director of photography for Monsters vs. Aliens, and we turned that into a stereoscopic language. And we then will hit repeat a lot over a course of several movies. Again, Monsters vs. Aliens, Shrek Forever After, Puss in Boots. There were a number of movies that I worked on during that time frame, all doing the camera animation and the stereoscopic pipeline and creative leading for the studio, or for those films. And it was right around this time that, by the way, I was in my zone. I loved it. I was having the time of my life working in LA, doing exactly what I felt like God was calling me to be able to do. And then it was right around this time where my wife and I had gotten married in there. I met my wife. She was also a media communications major at Point Loma. I met Katie, and then she joined the animation world, came up with me. She didn't quite have the same passion I did, but she was in the same world that I was. And then right around the time that Puss in Boots was about mid-production, Katie was pregnant with our first child. And I distinctly remember that for the very first time in my career, this was 2010. So I had been working for 6 years at DreamWorks at the time. For the first time in my career, I had felt like my personal desire of what God had put in my heart was changing. And suddenly the idea of being a father was pretty prominent of an idea, one of the most important things, and particularly the relationship of my wife and my daughter, Eloise. I knew Eloise was going to come into the world, and I knew that Katie, my wife, wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, but living in LA, honestly, and the salary that I had was just not feasible. And so we knew Katie was going to have to go back to work, and I started to wrestle with the idea of how important is this family thing for me. And I started to spend a ton of time in prayer, and say, God, if this is what you want for me, that Katie staying home is the most important thing. What does that mean for my career? If that's truly the new passion you're putting on my heart, what does that mean? And by the way, my passion for 3D hasn't faded at this point. It still to this day hasn't faded. The answer came, God's answer came 2 weeks before Katie was supposed to go back to work. So Eloise was born. She had gone on a maternity leave. I was finishing up Puss in Boots. 2 weeks before Katie was supposed to go back to work, the Walt Disney Company called me and said, hey, we'd like to offer you a position. We'd like you to come. So what happened was Disney had purchased Pixar a little bit earlier, right around that time frame, around 2006, somewhere in there. And so Disney was faced with having three feature-length animation studios. There was Pixar, there was Disney Feature Animation, which is the one that Walt founded and does a lot of the Moana and Frozen, a lot of the movies people are familiar with. And then a smaller studio called Disney Toon Studios, which had made a lot of direct-to-DVD movies, but was starting to embark in theatrical movies. And so they had started to do CG movies. And this started with the Tinkerbell franchise, the Fairies franchise, and then something that would become my baby, though I didn't know it at the time. So they said, hey, we need somebody who's done what you've done with the 3D stereoscopic knowledge, turn movies into 3D. But we need someone to unify these three studios. And so we're looking for some key creative people in the industry who can bring Pixar's way of doing things, Disney's way of doing things, and Disney Toon Studios' way of doing things, and molding them together. It's not one taking over. That's one thing that the media has actually, I think, gotten very wrong in the storytelling, is it wasn't Disney bought Pixar and then Pixar overhauled everything that Disney had ever done. That's actually not true. They did bring in John Lasseter, who was immensely influential in the storytelling. But as far as how the different productions and pipelines worked, that was actually this beautiful collaboration of the best ideas from multiple studios coming together. And they were looking for creative professionals to lead this effort. And they were looking to me, or offering me a position to do this specifically for 3D. Now, I'll tell you, at that time, I was wrestling with, I don't know if this is what God opening a door, or if this just me doing the same thing I was doing at DreamWorks and just doing it at Disney, which I love DreamWorks, but I had obviously loved growing up on Disney movies. So there was a lot of stuff floating in my head. Ultimately, I prayed about it and I felt like God was telling me to say no to Disney. And so I called them and I said, no, thank you. Thank you for the offer. I'm flattered, but no, thank you. And I wasn't completely convinced that was the right decision to make, but it just didn't seem financially like the right way to get Katie to stay home. And I was just wrestling with all of that. About 24 hours later, somewhere in that world, they called me back and they said, we don't accept your no. We don't accept your no. What would it take to get you to come over here? And so I explained very honestly where I was at. I explained that prioritizing my wife and my family is number one for me at this point in my life. And they said, hey, look, if it's a matter of money, we can tweak that a little bit. They were open to negotiating. But then I also felt this really odd nagging at the back of my brain, which again, I know was God. And he said to me, if you're not satisfied, don't do the same exact thing. And at this point, I had led groups of people. I had done 3D, and I had done that from a storytelling and business and technology perspective. But what I really hadn't done was truly myself breathed life into a story, into characters. And so I told them, I said, you know what, the next thing that I'm looking to do professionally is to become more of a creative director, storyteller type person. Now, the way that Disney works is for any of their major tentpole franchises, Star Wars, princesses, fairies, Cars, you name it, they have multiple creative directors across the company that work together to bring vision to life. I told Disney this, and they said, all right, we'll call you back. About a couple hours later, they called me back and they said, okay, so we want you to come do the job that we've been talking about, unifying the 3D pipeline, but we also want you to be a creative director on the Cars franchise. My mind was blown. I don't know how else to describe it. They offered me plenty of money for Katie to be able to stop working. They allowed, which became my number one like satisfying thing. And then on top of that, they said, hey, the biggest thing that we're going to have you focus on with the Cars franchise is actually spinning up an entire set of new movies. And so I found myself as one of the creative leads on the Planes franchise. So the Planes movies were a spin-off, theatrically released spin-off of the Cars movies with brand new characters, an extension of A Beautiful World, and I found myself as one of the creative leaders in this world of these Planes movies. And so I got to pour my heart into doing something that I was absolutely in love with doing professionally. Thanking God that he brought all of these pieces, these non sequitur pieces that I could have never designed this journey. And then I was faced with this moment of in the middle of Planes One, I'll never forget. I was faced with this moment of just pure reflection of like, God, you've led me on this amazing journey. I cannot fathom what you have in store for me next. I was living the dream I always wanted to live, forming a family, loving my professional career. And then one day, because failure follows all of us in life, and I hadn't had my dose of it yet in a while, then something really interesting happened. In the middle of Planes 2, the economics of the film industry had rapidly changed, and a whole bunch of different extenuating circumstances that I won't bore you with more or less led to Disney's decision to need to get rid of one of their 3 animation studios. And so you're not going to get rid of Pixar, and you certainly aren't going to get rid of Disney Feature Animation. And so the studio in question was this Disney Toon Studios, where I was spending most of my effort and time getting the Planes movies up off the ground. So it was the middle of Planes 2 where they made the decision to more or less shut down this studio. It was 7 months before the movie was supposed to come out. Actually, it was 11 months before the movie was supposed to come out. So I had an immense amount of time and heads up about it. And then I'll never forget it because as soon as they told everybody what was happening, as soon as they said, hey, the studio is going to shut down, of course, Disney being another great company, they try and find as many homes for as many of the amazing talent as they can. Walt Disney Feature Animation more or less offered me a position to kind of come and continue to do the same type of work that I was done working on what would be Frozen. And at the same time, I felt this really interesting pull, a pull that I did not expect. As I was starting my family and my son had now entered the picture, I have 3 kids, girl, boy, girl. As my son is starting into the picture, I really felt like I felt a strong anxiety around the idea of raising godly, moral people in an environment like LA, where, don't get me wrong, there are amazing Christian people in LA. But LA is a vain place. There's a lot of vanity in LA. From the car you drive to the people you know to the clothes that you wear, those things, it's cultural because so many people work in the entertainment. It's cultural that those things matter at a level that for me was unhealthy personally. And that I viewed as unhealthy for my kids. And so while I was faced with this idea of finishing out Planes 2 and transferring over to go work on Frozen, there was this nagging thing in the back of my head of, Jason, you need to lead your family away from Los Angeles. You got to get them out of LA. And I couldn't believe God's voice, because he had taken me on this journey to be where I was at. And I just couldn't wrap my head around the idea that, why would you take me out of this place that you had called me? And I had a long LA commute during those many years in LA, long LA commute, about an hour and a half each way. So 3 hours in the car by myself. And for about a month and a half, I didn't do podcasts. I didn't do radio. I didn't do music. I just sat in silence in traffic and just listened for God's voice. I talked, but I listened. And I just said, God, I don't know what you've done. I've experienced so much success that I could have never dreamed of on a road and a set of experiences that only you could have designed. I want to step in faithfully into what you have in store for me next, but I have no idea. I have no passion for what that would be and no idea where that would be. Katie, my wife, is from the Seattle area, and I felt that was sort of where I was being nudged to look. And so I started hitting up a bunch of companies, kind of inquiring with some friends, and then you reach out and try and talk to the network of people. And again, while I was kind of finishing out Planes 2, just talking to people up here, finding out what it's culturally like up in Seattle, and finding out what the businesses are up here and what kind of narrative storytelling exists up here, which is not a ton. Ultimately, I was offered a job. I was flown up to an interview. I was offered a job in a completely table flip way. Career had gone away at this point. Career would have been table flipped at this point, which was to join the technology industry. So there was a startup in Seattle that was selling, it was a flash sales website called Zulily, where they were basically focused on like quick 2-day sales of Tom shoes super cheap, or this kind of, clothing company stuff super cheap. It was kids sales, and they offered me a position that was far above what I had done so far from a leadership perspective. And so I found myself at this point in my career, I had managed teams of say maybe 10 max. And in this new role, I was going to have 260 people that would report to me. And so I became the director. I teased the story there. I was offered a position as the director of technology and engineering for this website. After an immense amount of prayer, my wife and I had prayed. I basically felt like God was nudging me there, and I didn't know why. And so I accepted this position as the director of technology for this company that I didn't know a ton about, in a world that I knew absolutely nothing about, in a place that, frankly, I didn't have a ton of passion. And it was the worst professional experience of my entire life. It was 18 months of just the worst grind, longest hours, thankless, terrible work, nothing I had ever experienced. The people in animation are so beautiful and loving and encouraging. And in this technology world, it was a bunch of money hungry. It was just awful. It was awful. And I survived for 18 months barely. It was not my cup of tea, but it brought us up to Seattle, and I know why it did, because of my experience working at Zulily. Microsoft called me, and they said, "Hey, we've seen your experience. You've done the 3D stereoscopic computer visualization stuff in a storytelling component, and you clearly have some leadership skills when it comes to technology. We want you to come join us." And I was like, "To do what?" And they're like, "Well, we can't tell you." And that was honestly the conversation. And I was like, "Well, I can't leave a company just because you tell me there's something cool." And they let me come in and interview informally with a few people and talk to a couple of people. None of them would tell me what it was, but every single one of them looked me directly in the eyes and they said, "Never in your life will you work on something as amazing as this." And all of them, they said that. And I was like, okay, either you're all drinking the Kool-Aid or there is truly something magical happening at Microsoft. Needless to say, I jumped over to Microsoft, and I realized why Zulily was a stepping stone in my path. Microsoft was working on a project which would become known as the HoloLens. Now, the HoloLens, for anyone not familiar, I encourage you to check it out. It looks like a pair of ski goggles, but what it does is it actually shoots highly specialized lasers onto your retina that give you a stereoscopic view of the world to be able to project holograms into your world. So that's a lot of wordy stuff, basically to say when you put these goggles on, you see three-dimensional holograms of computer-generated imagery in your world. It is one of the most amazing pieces of technology I've ever worked on, and if you ever get a chance to try one on, I cannot encourage you enough to do so. Any YouTube video that you see is not just marketing fluff. It's the technology is that amazing. So I came on to join Microsoft to launch the HoloLens. And I think actually here, I'll show you something. This is live.
Yeah.
I have this plaque that I keep, which is the launch of the HoloLens. That's the motherboard of one of the HoloLenses. So it's this amazing piece of technology that I'm really, really proud of having worked on. And so, as your career does, there were a bunch of different random stepping stones that happened next. I'm almost done with the story. Sorry, I know this has taken a while, but
no, you're fine.
I knew we launched the HoloLens. The HoloLens was a big success for Microsoft from an innovation standpoint and starting up a new business standpoint. I had a couple of opportunities to bounce around inside of Microsoft doing a couple of different things. Some of those were my choice. Some of them were not. Some of them were like organizational structural changes. But I did a couple of different things, from working on Microsoft's web browser for a little while to going back to HoloLens, but focusing more on creating enterprise experiences with it. All those things were very, very fun, but none of them except the creating the HoloLens itself was something I was super passionate about. And actually, about a year ago now, I found a team inside of Microsoft that was it honestly has changed my life. It really has. It's a small team. It was about 8 people when I joined. We're 11 now, and this team was a team of people that thought exactly like I think. They had passions exactly like my passions. They talked in a way that made me feel like I was best friends with all of them. Mm-hmm. And this group was doing something that Microsoft does not do. They were creating a tool for giving anyone on the web the power of modern 3D technology that any $60,000 computer program would be able to generate for you. The technology, the team that I joined is called Babylon JS. It stands for JavaScript, and it's basically a piece of technology that allows you to create stunning 3D visualizations, really high caliber visualizations, all inside of a web browser, and that anyone can use. And the piece, so Microsoft has 3D investments, largely in the Xbox division, but here's what made this distinctly different. Babylon JS is free and open source. So what that means is not only is the technology available for anyone to use for free, you can have the source code for free and put it into your own programs for free. Microsoft does not do this. Microsoft is a company built on making Office and Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, and charging people money for that. Microsoft doesn't make software and then give it away for free. And so this ragtag group of people deep in the heart of Microsoft was making this technology that I was in my passion wheelhouse. They were giving something away for free to make the world a better place without the, grind of the corporate dollar bills behind you. Mm-hmm. And then when I met them and started talking to them, you'll never believe what their greatest need was. They had an amazing set of engineers, passionate people, but you know what they had no experience in?
No story.
No storytelling. They had no storytelling. And they really knew that they needed someone who could talk to artists, talk to engineers, talk to new businesses, talk to anyone who wanted to use this technology and to help bring their stories to life, whether that be some kind of internal story around how they can use this technology to benefit their customers, or actual narrative storytelling. We have a person that's using our technology to actually make movies on the web, and I get to help this person figure out directionally where they want to go. And so I joined the Babylon JS team a year ago as a principal technology evangelist. That is my actual title. So I am here.
Okay, I got it. I got to interrupt there. Okay, so evangelist. So they know you're a Christian, maybe, and
I would love to say that it has to do with my faith. The title evangelism actually is about it's similar to how we might talk about the good news in your faith. It's about spreading the news about the piece of technology. And so in my job function, I get to function as I lead the team of people now. I am responsible for the general business and making sure that new businesses that inside and outside of Microsoft can work with our technology and work with our team and use the technology for their benefit. I'm also the head of marketing. I'm also a teacher. And I also get to function as one of the artists on the team. So I also get to do a bunch of artwork. And if you remind me, Dr. Hewitt, what I'll do is I'll send you a link to the YouTube channel and the piece of technology. And we actually have done, from July on to this point, we've done a new video every single week for the technology. And I get to teach a lot of people about the technology and stuff like that in a bunch of the videos. Okay. And so
can we bring you down to San Diego and do the same?
Yeah, we should. Okay. That'd be fun. Okay. And so professionally, I am in a place where I never thought I'd be. Reflecting back when I look at my story, and the reason I like to tell this story is that path is far too random for any person to have designed. Only a truly cosmic creator could have seen that type of a path, could have put the passions on my heart at the right times, could have whispered into my ear at the right times, could have nudged me at the right time.
Okay, I'm starting to tear up a little bit. Okay, keep going.
My story is not my story. My story is God's story. Yeah. And it has been random and unexpected, and it has been full of failure. And it has been full of success. And when I look back on my story, I think of my greatest success is listening to God and going where he nudged me to go. Mm-hmm. And while I couldn't see it along the way, I have had immense success, but more importantly, unmeasurable satisfaction with the fact that my creator had a plan for me and still does have a plan for me. And that as I embark on that along with him, it's better than I could have ever designed it myself. It really is.
Yeah, it is.
So that's my story. I'm sorry it took so long to tell, but it's been a journey of one.
Well, yeah, these students are going to be watching this here pretty soon, and so it'll be a good thing. They're really looking forward to it. So just a few questions, okay? Yeah. A few questions. So I'm wondering, the students usually ask, what was your one project and why?
What was, sorry, can you say it one more time? You cut out just a minute there for me.
What projects, in terms of films that you worked on,
Oh
what
yeah.
were your most favorite and why?
You know, it's funny. I would probably say I love all the movies for different reasons. Okay, I'll give you three.
Okay.
So Kung Fu Panda is my favorite movie. Like as a fan, I could sit down and watch Kung Fu Panda again and again and again. Like it's such a beautifully simple, charming movie. So as a fan, I loved the output that we made. It may not have been the smoothest production, it may not have been the, whatever, but is like the best output, the end result, right? Um, the most fun I had on a movie was B Movie. Okay, B Movie, in my opinion, was not one of the best movies that DreamWorks has ever done, but everybody had such a blast making that movie. From ping pong tournaments to the amount of laughter to I mean, here as an example, we figured out how to hack into each other's machines and play sounds out of each other's speakers at the most inappropriate times possible. So, like, a director is coming by to look at your work, and then you just play "Who Let the Dogs Out" on your roommate's computer full blast, like that kind of stuff. It was like,
Sounds
yeah, it's
like
just the
fun.
most fun.
Hmm.
And then I will tell you that Planes One, while a lot of people look at it as not the biggest commercial success in the world, Planes One had so much of me breathed into it creatively that it's hard not to look at that movie with the same degree of satisfaction and yeah, that I did with the Al Nevis, honestly. The Al Nevis wasn't the best output in the world, but I'm so satisfied by what I had embarked to do, and Planes was very, very similar. So yeah, I think those would be my three.
Great. Yeah. So another one that they often want to know about is like a typical day, when you're that first job you had, what was it like there? I mean, in terms of the demands and kind of the things you did. Yeah.
Yeah, good question. I'll start big picture and then I'll work down to day to
Yeah.
day. So big picture in the animation industry, and actually it's similar in the game industry as well. Um, you work on what's called crunch cycle. So basically, you have this thing that's an immovable object, which is your release date. And then you work back and figure out all the things you need to do to line up to get to your release date based on where you are at. And generally, what happens is there's more work to be done than there is time to do it, right? And so, there's a cyclical thing that happens where in the feature animation world, slightly different time frames for game, but it's similar. Feature animation world, about 3 months before the movie releases, there is really intense work hours. They're 60, maybe even 80-hour work days, or excuse me, work weeks. It can get pretty intense. There's 3 months where you're not seeing your family a ton.
Mhm.
But that happens for a movie. A CG movie generally takes 3 to 3.5 years to make from start to finish, generally. So 3 months of 3.5 years, what happens is when you're not on those 3 months, the studios have a very relaxed schedule. They don't necessarily even expect you to do your full 40 hours. Nobody's tracking your time. It's kind of this give and take relationship, right? They're saying, hey, you live your life with all the flexibility in the world. You want to work a 20-hour work week 1 week, whatever. We're not going to really look down on you for it. But you have to you have to get all your work done. But then when it comes to crunch time, that's when we need you to be reliable. We need to rely on you. And that's how and so this give and take between the studio and the staff that exists at that high level. And so the day to day, the reason I frame that is the day to day looks different, sort of depending on where you're at in the production cycle.
Mhm.
But as a generic thing, basically every morning you have a team meeting where the whole team gets together and everybody kind of talks about what did you do yesterday, what are you working on today, are you blocked by anything, meaning is there anything getting in your way, a problem that you can't solve by yourself, something like that. And so you start off your morning with this kind of team meeting, and then you generally get to back to your desk and you're working on actual shot work that's animating cameras or characters or setting up scenes. And so you're on $65,000 workstation, tweaking, little things, working on a computer. And then at DreamWorks, as an example, there's this free cafeteria, and so you can go have lunch with all your friends. And then generally in the afternoon, there's a lot of different ways to be either creative or creatively problem solve. So there's a lot of different collaborative exercises that are happening all afternoon in a lot of the studios that kind of get your brain flowing creatively. But also there's workshop sessions between productions. So this movie might talk to this movie on how hey, how'd you solve this problem? We have this unique problem over here. You got any ideas? And so generally that kind of happens then a little bit in the afternoon. And so that's kind of a very, very generalized thing, a way of working. But and then obviously the hours are longer and look a little different, and more frequent check-ins when you're in crunch time and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. The last question has to do with advice. And so when you were there at Point Loma back in 2002, I guess you were there from 2000 to 2004.
That's right. Yeah.
And we didn't have a script writing class. We didn't have a Point TV television station. We didn't have all the stuff we have now. Okay.
Yeah.
So picture yourself in that kind of thing where you're shooting multiple films every year. Okay. Yeah. You're able to go off and do all kinds of other projects if you want to. If you want to focus on commercials and have your own company to make commercials for the rest of your life, you can start here. So you can do that at Point Loma. Given that, if you were in that realm, what kind of advice do you have for them about preparing for the professional world?
Yeah, well, I mean, the advice question is always so different based on people's experience. I'll tell you this. I'll give you two. The first one, the most important, is, I've been shocked at how far a smile goes in the world. There's a lot of people that carry a tremendous amount of stress and weight and anxiety. We all do. And a lot of the success that I've had, I have a strong work ethic, but a lot of the success I've had specifically in jumping between things, jumping from production to creative, from creative to more creative, things that I don't, have a lot of experience in, and over to technology, those big jumps, those big unexpected jumps that are hard to prep for. A lot of the time in interviews, when I talk to people, I find that your ability to communicate your own internal happiness or pleasure, or that shining light, or whatever you want to call it, for me, it's faith and passion. When you let that come out on your face, it's infectious and people are drawn to it. There's different words for it, charisma, charm. The idea of just letting your internal passion and happiness show on your face is infectious and it draws people to you. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people get really nervous and scared when they're talking to professionals. And for me, I really like to remind myself that this all started, for me, everything started with Toy Story. It started with kids' movies. And that there's something amazing that brings a smile to my face about that. And to be able to share that, there's been a lot of people that have been drawn to give me a chance when otherwise they may not, because I think I've shared that with them. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I honestly believe this. I honestly believe that you can do absolutely anything that you put your mind to and you put your prayer to. That God will open up any possible door, and can open up any possible door. He may close some and take you on an unexpected journey to get there, but he can do it. But it also is not going to be handed to you for free. So no matter what it is that you want to do, no matter what it is that you can do, perseverance through failure and hard endurance and hard work and research is so incredibly important. Whenever I jumped to do something differently in my career, it didn't just go, okay, time's up. And it wasn't just all smiles. It was smiles plus communicating passion, plus communicating an immense amount of research, and communicating a degree of work ethic. The greatest example I think I have is, before I got my first job with DreamWorks, the amount of energy I put into learning the software and listening to the people, researching the space. I was a sponge, soaking up as much information as I could. You have to work hard. You have to, and it will pay dividends if you do. Yeah, I guess maybe this is a third one with the hard work component, but the perseverance thing. I mean, you're going to hit failure. You're going to hit failure. You're going to have the film school that you think your whole future is dependent on that's going to reject you. It's going to happen. And at that moment, yeah, it's going to be overwhelming and you're going to feel like an idiot and like you can't accomplish anything. It happens. It happens. It's a step on your journey. That's all it is. It's a step, and it may feel like a slip, but it's not. It's there intentionally.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing your journey again.
Yeah.
And yeah, the students are going to be watching this and taking a look, and they may have questions.
Yeah.
Is it okay to, okay? So
yeah, thank you for reminding me. I always like to end every one of our sessions together by saying, like, I'm a very down to earth person. Please feel free to reach out and chat, even if you just want to say hi. I'd love to hear from you, hear what your passions are. Email me at jason.carter@outlook.com. Super, super easy. And I'm not the fastest in the world to respond, but I promise I will respond eventually, even if it takes me a day or two. And yeah, Dr. Hewitt, thanks a million for having me back on to chat with everybody. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I do want to talk a little bit more. Okay.
Cool.
Thanks again. Thanks again. Bye-bye.